Good morning out there. You are tuned in for Local News Live, presented as a community service of AOC Community Media in partnership with The Advocate. You can go to The Advocate online at www.theadvocate.com/Acadiana if you want Acadiana-specific stories. So, without further ado, hopefully we are going out live to all the places we need to go live, and I will read the news. I'm your reader, Matt Roberts of AOC Community Media. All right, so our first story today is headline, Anthony Fauci, coronavirus shutdown in Louisiana likely needed to come a bit sooner. This is by Caitlin Umholtz, a staff writer for The Advocate. Louisiana and the rapid growth of coronavirus cases across the state was a focus of Chris Cuomo's primetime show on CNN when he invited guest Dr. Anthony Fauci on Wednesday evening to discuss the state and country's acceleration of the spread. During the CNN interview, Cuomo asked Fauci, the director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, to explain why Louisiana's coronavirus cases exploded from 100 to more than 1,000 in just a week's time. Fauci said those state and New Orleans officials have put in place rigid restrictions to keep people inside and further the spread of COVID-19. A shutdown probably could have come sooner. It is likely that should have been done a little bit sooner, Fauci said. I'm not blaming anyone on that, but you get caught unaware because the nature of this outbreak that's so frustrating and in many respects a bit frightening and intimidating, it putters along and you think you're okay. Then it starts to go up a little and bingo, it goes up in an exponential way. That's what's happening in New Orleans right now, said Fauci. Coronavirus in Louisiana and New Orleans has recently become the center of national attention after the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate ran a story stating Orleans Parish was 6th in the nation for cases per capita, right behind 5 metro New York counties. Since then, the state's coronavirus problem has been covered by national outlets, and President Donald Trump approved Louisiana as the 4th state to receive a major disaster declaration. As of Wednesday, there were 1,795 confirmed cases and 65 COVID-19 deaths in Louisiana. The majority of those cases have been reported out of Orleans Parish. And that will bring us to our next story. Let's see. And actually, here is the raw data. This is Louisiana coronavirus tracking. You can reach this at theadvocate.com again. This is compiled by Dan Swinson, Amy Just, and Kyle Whitfield, and it has some additional charts and graphs if you go look at it on there. So in Louisiana, positive tests for coronavirus now span many parishes, according to the Louisiana Department of Health. Since the first case in Louisiana was reported on March 9th, The Advocate and Times-Picayune have been and are continuing to track cases across Louisiana. This page will be updated at noon daily with the latest figures from LDH and information from government officials. Updates from LDH are only coming once daily going forward, the state has announced. So there are 1,795 total number of people in Louisiana testing positive for coronavirus. Sorry, the lawnmower just started across the street. Will, if you're listening, let me know if that is too bad. I can try and find a quieter place. 65 total number of deaths. And then the rest would be probably better looked at because it's maps and charts that'll keep you informed on the data from the Louisiana Department of Health. All right, so pull up my next story there. Thanks for bearing with us here. So this next story for Louisiana's 100K newly without jobs, unemployment benefit boost seen as a life support amid coronavirus. This is by Tyler Bridges, a staff writer for The Advocate. So there's an update to this story since it was published, I think, yesterday afternoon. The Senate passed the stimulus package just before midnight on Wednesday, and the House is expected to approve it on Friday. Jobless workers in Louisiana would receive $600 per week for several months as part of a massive $2 trillion stimulus package before the U.S. Senate that aims to keep the coronavirus-ravaged economy on life support. The $600 weekly payment would go both to salaried workers who receive unemployment insurance and independent contractors who are not currently eligible for state assistance. According to policy analysts tracking the proposed legislation, the federal measure would also extend unemployment insurance by another 13 weeks, which would be important for workers who have already been without a job for weeks and will soon exhaust their benefits. State law limits unemployment benefits to 26 weeks before coronavirus in January. 111,000 people reported themselves as unemployed, or 5.3% of the state's workforce. Malika Burke, a tattoo artist at Hell or High Water Tattoo in New Orleans, is one of the now unemployed workers who would become eligible for unemployment insurance under the legislation. Burke, known by her clients as Mecca, is a contract employee who last worked on March 17th, and then business evaporated. The bill would make Burke eligible for half of the $216 average weekly unemployment claim in Louisiana, $108 plus the $600 for a total of $708 per week through perhaps as long as June 30th. Burke worries about what's ahead, but if Congress passes the stimulus measure, she said, I'd be able to pay all bills, eat, and sort of have a life. That would alleviate considerable amount of anxiety. The White House and Senate Democratic leadership announced early Wednesday morning that the two sides had reached a deal and expected to ratify the measure by noon that day. But the agreement broke down Wednesday afternoon as several Republican senators said the scale of the jobless aid was so generous that it would discourage people from returning to work. Still, lawmakers are under enormous political pressure to pass a relief measure quickly and open the federal government spigot. Once the bill passes, how long it takes for jobless workers to begin receiving benefits will depend on each state's unemployment system. U.S. Senator John Kennedy told reporters on Wednesday, "We want to get this money out the door," Kennedy said. As has happened in other states, Louisiana's Workforce Commission, which oversees the state unemployment insurance system, has been overwhelmed in recent days by people applying online and over the phone. About 10,000 jobless workers in Louisiana have applied for unemployment insurance each of the past 10 days, or 100,000 total, according to the Workforce Commission. About 1,500 people apply during a normal week. Under the state's unemployment insurance system, jobless salaried workers can receive no more than the $247 weekly. Under the proposed legislation, they would receive an additional $600 per week for a total of up to $847 per week for several months. That would be a big incentive for the working man, said Peter Garino, a Moreau resident who until 2 weeks ago had steady employment as a carpenter setting up trade shows in the Ernest N. Memorial Convention Center. Stan Vager, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank in Washington, said Congress appears likely to offer workers more generous benefits than expected only 2 weeks ago. They'll get a massive bump in their unemployment benefits, Vager said. Many of those who have just filed claims are becoming concerned as their meager savings dwindle. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel right at the moment, said Chaz Howell, a veteran French Quarter tour guide who offers ghost and voodoo tours under the moniker Lord Chaz. I'm literally stuck at home now. Howell is self-employed, and it is not clear yet whether he would be able to apply for unemployment insurance under the provision that would expand jobless benefits to contractors. Contract employees seeking unemployment insurance would have to file a claim, said Ava DeJoy, Secretary of Louisiana Workforce Commission, although she said not all the details are yet clear. DeJoy emphasized that anybody who files for a jobless claim has to provide weekly certification each Sunday to continue to receive unemployment payment. Louisiana happens to have the stingiest unemployment system in the country, according to an analysis by the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, a liberal think tank in Washington, D.C. Jobless workers in Louisiana earn 23% of what they were making, which ranks the state dead last among the 50 states in the average weekly benefits it pays as a share of average weekly wages. Only 11% of unemployed workers actually receive unemployment insurance because of restrictions on who qualifies, and perhaps the low amount they would receive discourages them from applying. The 11% rate ranks Louisiana as 46th lowest in the country. The expanded federal aid wouldn't do anything for Mick Stone. Stone is a street musician in the French Quarter and mostly earns cash. He doesn't have any documentation to show how much he earns. Annalise Goger, a fellow at the Centris Brookings Institution think tank in Washington, said the proposed federal legislation includes many beneficial elements but leaves out too many people on the economic margins. This crisis is revealing the deep holes we have built up over time, Goger said. All right, that looks like that's the end of that story. Let me make sure I gave a byline there. That is by Tyler Bridges, a staff writer at The Advocate. All right, let me pull up this next story here. I think this one, yeah, this is a little ray of light there. And this is an article from the Time Saver Meals from Champagne's Market. Champagne's one of those essential businesses keeping us open right now. Thanks for everything you guys have done out there to keep us going, and all the supermarkets and all the essential businesses, all the takeout restaurants now in town. So here we go. This story is protein-packed bourbon baked beans is a quick comfort food in a time when we all need some comfort food, huh? All right. Let me tell you, actually, they have it at the end. So this article is written by Imani Guillory, so I'll be speaking in her voice, also known as Cajun Mama, and you can follow Imani on Facebook at Cajun Mama Louisiana for more recipes and food ideas, but here is her idea for protein-packed bourbon-baked beans. She writes, having my family home around the clock has given me the opportunity to prepare some really great dishes for them. I'm able to use them as my guinea pigs for new creations, as well as treat them with some of their old favorites. This recipe is definitely one of the tried and true favorites among the family. It's a protein-packed dish with lots of flavor. It freezes well, so you can always double the batch size and freeze some for later. Most of my family prefer the beans as a side dish to a larger main dish. However, my little one simply enjoys them over rice. The entire recipe takes about 25 minutes, so you'll be able to serve this comfort food to your family in no time. All right, so bourbon baked beans, 8 cups. Here's the ingredients list. Get ready to write it down. I'll give you a second to grab a pencil while I grab my coffee. Grab your pencil. Or pen, I should say. You could grab a pen too. All right, hopefully you're all ready there. So you will need 8 cups homemade or store-bought baked beans, 12 strips thick cut maple bacon pan-fried, 1 cup Cajun Trinity chopped. That is onions, celery, bell peppers, right? Correct me if I'm wrong out there. 1 pound ground sirloin cooked, 1 pound ground pork cooked, 1 pound pork tasso cubed, half a pound pork tasso cubed. That would have been too much tasso. 1/2 a pound pork tasso, correct that. 1/4 a cup of dark brown sugar, 1/2 a cup of your favorite bourbon, dry Cajun seasoning blend. Here's the directions. In a large pot on medium heat, add bourbon and sugar. Stir constantly until mixture thickens. Add beans and Cajun Trinity. Stir for 3 minutes. Fold in the ground beef and pork. Reduce heat to medium, then add tasso. You may add an additional splash of bourbon during this step. Finally, crumble your cooked bacon into the pot and add dry Cajun seasoning to taste. Cover and cook for 20 to 25 minutes, stirring occasionally. Remove from heat and serve. All right, and that was once again by Imani Guillory, also known as Cajun Mama, and you can find her on Facebook, Cajun Mama, Louisiana. I'm going to pull up the next story, but while I'm doing that, I'll let you all know that the Advocate, who is certainly doing a good job of keeping us all informed, they've made all their coronavirus coverage absolutely free to anybody who needs it. They partner with AOC so that we can read the news for the visually impaired and people who want to ingest it through their ears as opposed to through their eyes. So thanks to the Advocate, and you can go and support local journalists at their site, which, trust you me, the journalism industry was already struggling, and now it is having a hard time at a time when we find we need them most to present accurate information to us all, as we're all kind of looking for it. So our next story, going back to the coronavirus spread in Louisiana, coronavirus spread in Louisiana could mean critical shortage of ventilators, by Jeff Adelson and Sam Carlin, who are staff writers for The Advocate. All right, so intensive care beds and ventilators are amongst the most critical needs for the patients most seriously stricken with coronavirus. And state data shows that Louisiana and New Orleans in particular may have nowhere near as many as needed to keep pace with the infection spread. The alarming shortage of ventilators, which were keeping more than 160 coronavirus patients in the state alive on Wednesday, may mean the state will have no more left to offer patients who need them by the first week of April, Governor John Bel Edwards said during a press conference on Wednesday. So as the virus continues to run its course, the state is seeking to add nearly 2,000 ventilators, which pump oxygen into the lungs of patients with severe respiratory illnesses, to have enough on hand. Our ventilator capacity is far from okay in Louisiana, Edwards said. This is probably the most significant near-term issue related to our capacity to treat COVID-19 patients. Statewide, Louisiana has nearly 2,750 ventilators available, according to data released by the Louisiana Department of Health this week. Across the state, only about 28% of these are in use, which would seem to provide a comfortable margin as the virus progresses. But state officials say they expect that a capacity to soon be exceeded due to the surging number of cases. And there already seems to be signs that there will soon be strain on the ventilator supply, even though there are more ventilators available in New Orleans area than anywhere else in the state. About half of those are currently being used, a far higher percentage than any other region. The number of coronavirus cases in Louisiana continued to climb to 1,795 on Wednesday, when the state saw its largest single-day increase in patients who tested positive. A total of 491 of those patients are currently in hospitals, and 163 are now on ventilators, which help pump air into patients' lungs as their bodies try to fight the virus. The state and some hospitals are scrambling to increase their capacity, though that's been complicated by a nationwide demand for ventilators as the virus spreads across the country. Edwards said hundreds of ventilators will be sent to New Orleans area hospitals this week, but that the region would still need about 600 more. The state has not released the model it's using to estimate the spread and severity of the virus or to predict how much capacity hospitals will need to appropriately treat patients. But Edwards' dire warning exceeds even the worst-case predictions of a model developed by researchers at the Harvard Global Health Institute to predict whether various areas have enough hospital and ICU beds available to care for coronavirus patients. That model, based largely on data from the start of the outbreak in Wuhan, China, estimated the state could be short 16 1,000 hospital beds, and thousands of spots at an ICU because of the need to care for coronavirus patients. The Times-Picayune and the Advocate used the model along with statistics about current hospital capacity and estimates of how many patients would need ventilators based on the research from China to estimate what capacity could be needed. Louisiana could be short almost 6,000 ICU beds for adults who are most likely to need critical care if they contract the virus according to the model. Ventilators represent yet another layer of care that is needed and one that cannot be replaced simply by adding bed space and other facilities. That model predicts that in a scenario where the virus spreads quickly and widely, infecting 60% of the population in 6 months, the states would need 1,176 more ventilators than it now has available to provide one to every patient that needs them. Researchers studying data from Wuhan have estimated that about half of all patients needing to be placed in ICUs would eventually need to go on ventilators. The model does not account for the virus spreading at different rates or the possibility that other factors, such as underlying health of an area's population, might affect hospitalization rates. In Louisiana, the number of coronavirus patients hospitalized appears to be outpacing the 20% estimates of researchers. More than 27% of the people who test positive for the virus are currently hospitalized in the state, and that figure does not account for those who may that line is cut off in my printer, I apologize. That roughly squares with what officials with Ochsner Health, the statewide hospital chain, said it's seeing in intensive care units. More than 200 ventilators are in use at Ochsner hospitals today, Medical Director Robert Hart said on Wednesday, and there are 100 ready to be used if necessary. The hospitals also ordered another 100 a few weeks ago to prepare for what it would need to deal with the virus, Hart said. But with high demand for the equipment across the country, finding additional supplies has been difficult. We're used to dealing with disasters that only hit one part of the country, and if you need supplies, you get them from the rest of the country because the rest of the country is still running, Hart said. Right. All right, so for some, maybe another little silver lining here, this article is called headline, Stimulus Bill Could Help Us Be Able to Bounce Back from Coronavirus, Acadiana Business Owners Say. That is our business owners keeping it positive there. The story is by Adam Daigle and Dan Boudreau, both staff writers for the Acadiana Advocate. Todd Buteau was co-owner of 6 restaurants when the shutdowns were ordered in an attempt to slow down the coronavirus in Louisiana. Now he's down to 2, and those may close soon too, as well. Buteau, co-owner of Poke Go, Chopsticks, and Izumi Ramen, could get a significant boost from the federal government if the $2 trillion stimulus package earned Senate and House approval. A significant part of the bill includes $367 billion program for small business to keep making payroll while workers are forced to stay at home. It also includes $500 billion for loans for larger industries and relief for airlines and hospitals. Buteau's company, like other small businesses in Acadiana, could use the assistance. I don't know all the details of the bill, but if it's what they say, we'll definitely be looking into it and applying, because I think that it will help us be able to bounce back from this when we can reopen, he said. Izumi's is going to be featured on the reality show Man vs. Food on April 21st. And even though I don't think we're going to be reopened by then, I want us to reopen and be able to have a watch party and really celebrate with all of our loyal customers. The measure is the largest economic relief bill in history, and both parties' leaders were desperate for quick passage of a bill aimed at a virus that is costing lives and jobs by the hour. The package is intended as a week-long or a month-long patch for an economy spiraling into recession or worse, and a nation facing a grim toll from an infection that's killed nearly 20,000 people worldwide. Underscoring the effort's sheer magnitude, the bill finances a response with a price tag that equals half the size of their entire $4 trillion annual budget. Among the bill's highlights are loans and guarantees to businesses, state and local governments, $500 billion, includes up to $50 billion for passenger airlines, $8 billion for cargo carriers, and $17 billion for businesses critical to maintaining national security. Companies accepting loans may not repurchase outstanding stock, must maintain their employment levels as of March 13, 2020, to the extent practicable. And bar raises for 2 years to executives earning over $425,000 annually. Small businesses includes $350 billion for companies with 500 employees or fewer, loans that may be forgiven if company retains workers, $17 billion to help small businesses repay existing loans, $10 billion for grants up to $10,000 for small businesses to pay operating costs. Loans and grants would provide immediate help, but the question is how soon can small business get those loans, said Greg Gautreaux, President and CEO of the Lafayette Economic Development Authority, or LEDA. His agency collected nearly 1,000 surveys among business owners of how the recent weeks have affected their businesses. Any stimulus package that has support for small business would be very, very welcome, said Greg Gautreaux, President and CEO of LEDA. We have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, that are either closing or are extremely nervous. They can hang on for a small period of time, but I don't think they can hang on for months. I think the issue is below 50 employees, it's almost impossible to survive paying employees with no income coming in unless you can get the loans tomorrow. The next question is how soon can the loans be available? Loans or grants would help the local hotel industry survive. Recent cancellations of conventions and other events so far since the shutdown has resulted in $38.3 million in lost revenue. Hotels have furloughed most of their employees. That's something that would be more amenable to our hoteliers, said Ben Berthelot, CEO of Lafayette Travel. I haven't read the bill in full detail. We're all just trying to sort through it, but we're making calls with industry partners and our business partners to try and get a better feel for what the stimulus looks like. I think in general, the concept of loans being able to be forgiven is critical because they're not in a position to take on any further debt. At Monrev Salon in downtown Lafayette, owner Nicole David said it struck her on Wednesday when she had to cancel all of her auto pays for bills due to how tight things had gotten. She had to start looking for loans just to get by and keep myself and everything else going. It's been really rough, she said. I think the stimulus should be absolutely something that should be available to us. Thanks for that story, Adam Daigle. Let's see what we have next. All right. Here is a story by Megan Wyatt, a staff writer for the Acadiana Advocate. How Cajun country traditions prepared locals to sew face masks for coronavirus pandemic. All right, pardon me 1 second while I take a little sip of coffee here. All right. Christine Savoy sat down in her sewing machine last weekend for the first time in more than a month. In mid-February, she was adding colorful fringe to a costume ahead of a rural Mardi Gras celebration. This time, she was making face masks to donate to hospitals as the novel coronavirus pandemic depletes medical supplies. My family is Cajun French, Savoy said, and learning to sew is basically a family tradition. Like many in rural Acadiana communities, the 24-year-old Crowley native learned how to sew from her mother and grandmother. It's a household skill that, although not as vital as it once was, remains especially useful during the Mardi Gras season. After all, you won't find the costumes worn during rural chicken chases at big box stores or department stores, and even though formal Mardi Gras ball gowns are easier to purchase, there are often alterations to make and sequins to add. It's perhaps why many in Acadiana still own sewing machines and have the skills needed to sew cloth face masks for regional medical providers. Lafayette hospitals began accepting handmade mask donations last weekend as the number of known cases of COVID-19 the disease caused by the new coronavirus in the area continued to grow. Savoie said she received a call from representative at Our Lady of Lourdes Regional Medical Center soon after filling out an online donation form. They called me on Sunday and asked when I could have them ready, Savoie said. They told me that they were running desperately low and needed them for testing sites and after hours. Savoie and her mom worked until midnight to make 24 face masks for the hospital, which they packaged individually in resealable plastic bags and left in their mailbox for a volunteer to pick up. We've been very blessed, said Travis Badeau, a spokesperson for Lourdes. Acadiana by nature is a very giving and supporting community. It's times like this that our residents really shine. The donations are letting our team members know that we're not alone right now. Although hospital administrators have publicly said there is not a shortage of disposable surgical masks, they are preparing for the possibility. They have called for donations of disposable surgical masks and N95 masks, in addition to the handmade cloth masks. Our healthcare systems are not out of personal protective equipment, said Patricia Thompson, spokeswoman for Lafayette General Medical Center. However, given the surge that other areas are experiencing, and knowing that the whole world is competing for the same supplies, we thought it was a good idea to start accepting donations early on when people started suffering. Handmade face masks are recommended for use by healthcare providers caring for patients with COVID-19 only, as a last resort, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC recommends exercising caution when considering the use of homemade options because their protection capability remains unknown, instead recommending their use in combination with a secondary face shield. At this time, Thompson said the handmade masks are not being used by doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals working directly with patients who are suspected to have COVID-19. Instead, the reusable cloth masks are primarily being given to patients recovering at home and their caretakers. They're also being used by medical professionals who are not in close contact with patients suspected to have the virus, such as hospital receptionists. The handmade masks are helping to stretch out the remaining supply of medical-grade masks. I think Cajuns by nature are very resourceful, Thompson said. I can remember learning about the Great Depression and asking my grandmother about it. I remember she told me, we were already poor. We didn't miss anything because we were already there. So I think some of what we're seeing from crafters and makers here is a result of our history. You make, do, and you learn how to be resourceful. Savoie and her mom have been able to make a few dozen masks per day. Each mask is made of cotton and lined with flannel. Ribbons are attached to secure the mask in place. Unlike the typical disposable masks, most of the cloth masks are bright and colorful. I like using cute fabrics that are still within the guidelines, Savoie said. I think it's less intimidating for someone who might be scared, whether it's a caretaker or a patient who's wearing one. It's my hope that whoever wears one of my masks will be cheered up. Savoie's masks include patterns inspired by the Star Wars sci-fi movie franchise, Harry Potter, fantasy book series, and the Peanuts newspaper comic strip. A few thousand handmade masks have been donated this week to healthcare providers through newly established donation sites, including the United Way of Acadiana, Lola Pink Fabrics, and ANA Sewing Center. And it's not just home seamstresses who are busy sewing masks. Claire Champagne of ANA Sewing Center has also been making cloth masks alongside her mother at their Broussard shop. They've made a few hundred so far and have collected additional donations from their regular customers who are busy making masks from their homes. Although many people have reached out about purchasing masks, Champagne has instead made tutorial videos so others can make their own. Champagne said she wants to make as many masks as she can for those most in need. I feel like our calling is to fill the needs of those who are on the front line, Champagne said. No one wants to profit from a disaster, so we aren't selling any of what we're making. The cause is close to Champagne's heart because she has multiple friends who work in the healthcare industry. Champagne said they're telling her that wearing reusable cloth masks extend the life of each disposable mask. Sorry, that line was cut off. And those disposable masks are becoming more precious with every passing day. So the cloth masks are appreciated, obviously. It's horrifying that it's come to this. It's horrifying, Champagne said. But we all have a weird opportunity right now to do something. I don't think anybody's going to turn away any kind of mask at this point. If you want to contribute, you can visit Lafayette General's Facebook page for a pattern and instruction on how to make a mask, or reach out to Lourdes through the online COVID-19 donation form for specific instructions. Handmade masks can be dropped off between 8 a.m. and noon at the United Way of Acadiana's warehouse at 215 East Pinhook Road. Donations are also being accepted at A&A Sewing Center, 1209 Albertsons Parkway, Suite J, and Lola Pink Fabrics, 123 Arnold Boulevard. Thanks, Megan Wyatt, for that story. Let's see what our next story is. All right, so this was published yesterday afternoon. It's by Ken Stickney, a staff writer. Oil and gas is done for 2020. Energy economist says gas as low as $1.29 per gallon in Louisiana. Here's a hot consumer tip from a national petroleum analyst. Don't fill your tank for a bargain. Pump prices may be lower tomorrow too. Patrick Dehan of Gas Buddy, the national consumer website, said gas prices have been leaking all month and no one's found the plug. Gas prices have spent virtually all of March marching lower, with the drop continuing as the coronavirus destroys oil demand globally, leading to the lowest oil prices we've seen in 18 years, paving the way for still an additional 35 to 75 cent per gallon drop at most stations in the weeks ahead, he said. Here's what that means. For the fourth consecutive week, the national pump prices dropped, this time by 12.8 cents to a national average of $2.08 per gallon. The West Texas Intermediate crude oil price hit a low of $22.91 a barrel on Wednesday. Here's how that affected prices in Louisiana. 3 stations in Shreveport, 1 in Baton Rouge, were selling gas for $1.29 a gallon on Wednesday. In Lafayette, Sam's Club 3222 Ambassador Caffrey, and Costco 201 Farm Meadow Road were both selling a gallon of unleaded at $1.55 Wednesday, the low price in town. Dehan said a 99-cent per gallon gas is a possibility this year, and it may be more widespread than previously believed. David Dismukes, executive director and professor at LSU Center for Energy Studies, said the problems are well known. The novel coronavirus is keeping much of the country and much of the world's people at home and depressing demand for gasoline, while production rivals Saudi Arabia and Russia have engaged in an untimely petroleum war, flooding the market with oil and suppressing prices. It's an uncertain situation right now, Dismukes said. You're not going to fix OPEC. They don't meet until June. And the coronavirus, well, that's anyone's guess. Dismukes said energy is taking a pounding around Louisiana, including petrochemicals. If he didn't discern bright spots, he saw faint signs for hope, including the president's optimism for an earlier revival for the economy and the confidence that generates. Congress's stimulus package will help. We've had 2 good days in equities and commodity markets, he said. We need to continue building confidence. He said the market seemed to want to lift. Oil prices were bumping up toward $25 a barrel later in the day Wednesday, and they could recover another $5 a barrel or so. But Dismukes said the best advice for those in business is to hunker down. The double whammy of the global pandemic and the oil glut generated by the Saudis and Russians have undercut the chances of rapid recovery for energy. For 2020, it's kind of done, he said. Stick a fork in it. Those in the energy industry may be hoping to weather the year and hope for more to come 2021. There are, he said, no quick fixes. We are in a global energy economy, he said, where protectionism such as tariffs fails. The recovery may mean that oil and gas will have fewer, stronger players. Don't try to change the world, but survive the next 6 to 8 months, he said. He'd advise those in the industry. There's no pie in the sky. That was again by Ken Stickney. Let's see, we have a few more minutes here. At least a few more minutes. All right. Uh, So, this is headline Disaster Declaration means much needed federal assistance in fight against coronavirus. And this was published yesterday afternoon or yesterday evening at about 7 p.m. By Bryn Stoll and Sam Carlin, staff writers for The Advocate. Louisiana officials hope new national attention on the state's rapid surge in coronavirus cases, including a major disaster declaration from the White House, will help stave off a shortage of crucial resources as New Orleans faces the prospect of running out of key medical supplies as soon as next week. Governor John Bel Edwards said Wednesday that the White House's decision to grant his request for disaster status the night before brings Louisiana into the national conversation. Still, the trajectory of cases that prompted Edwards recently to warn that Louisiana could have become the next Italy, where thousands have died in crowded emergency rooms amid a shortage of ventilators, showed little signs of improving. With a burst in testing, Louisiana saw its largest single-day increase in known coronavirus cases and deaths Wednesday, as cases rose to 1,795 and deaths rose to 65. Edwards said he's made urgent appeals to the federal government and private vendors for desperately needed medical supplies, including masks and protective clothing. Edwards said Louisiana needs to double its supply of roughly 2,000 ventilators, machines that pump oxygen into the lungs of patients with severe respiratory illness, a deadly symptom of the coronavirus, to treat the expected waves of critically ill patients. Meanwhile, hospitals were directing staff to reuse scarce personal protective equipment items that are usually thrown away to avoid spreading infection. Edwards' administration was racing to find more, with National Guard troops sending shipments out in the middle of the night to meet a fast-growing demand. The state was also trying to land several hundred ventilators in the coming days to avoid running out of the equipment as early as the first week in April in the New Orleans area. But efforts to secure those supplies are putting the state in desperate competition with other states that have deeper pockets. Edwards called on the federal government to do more to prioritize delivery of equipment to where it's most needed. "I don't know where else it would come from," Edwards told PBS NewsHour on Wednesday evening. "You're left to beg, borrow, or steal what you need." Louisiana's rapidly growing number of COVID-19 cases, mostly in the New Orleans area, placed the state third per capita in the U.S., with New Orleans quickly becoming a particular crisis point. Hospitals in New York City, another hotspot, are also raising alarm about being overwhelmed with cases in the coming days. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has asked for 30,000 ventilators. To say demand is outpacing supplies would be a gross understatement, Edwards said. U.S. Representative Cedric Richmond, Democrat New Orleans, also said the Trump administration should rapidly mobilize to direct medical supplies and avert potential catastrophes. Richmond said there was still time to act, but not much. "We need it, and we need it right now. This is not make-believe. We have a real potential disaster here," said Richmond. "New York has different abilities. They're able to outbid us on everything that comes available on the open market. So the federal government needs to recognize that and acknowledge that we, in Louisiana, are getting a double whammy." U.S. Representative Garrett Graves, Republican, Baton Rouge, said he's been advocating for waivers and declarations from the White House to help Louisiana respond more quickly. He also called on the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to try to secure the state more protective gear and masks. Graves said he hopes federal officials will be able to help acquire the medical equipment, but his experience in the wake of previous disasters like the 2010 Gulf oil spill show it's wise to pursue multiple potential suppliers at once. This time, Graves said, the global scale of the coronavirus crisis makes the scramble for life-saving resources more difficult. "We've been in touch with the federal officials every single day, multiple times a day," said Graves. "We need to keep working in order to prevent this from becoming a bigger crisis." The Presidential Disaster Declaration means that the federal government will reimburse 75% of what Louisiana state and local governments spend responding to the disaster. Edwards' administration said that number was $113 million as of Wednesday and rapidly rising as state officials work to build out hospitals, buy up equipment, and rapidly expand coronavirus testing. Members of Louisiana congressional delegation have lobbied the White House to increase that share to 100%, something that would ease pressure on state and local government budgets already facing dramatic drops in tax revenue thanks to shutdown and plunging oil prices. Ventilators are in extremely short supply because of a soaring demand, Ochsner Health System CEO Warner Thomas said in a conference call with reporters that normally only about 30% to 40% of patients in the intensive care unit require a ventilator. Now, with an influx of coronavirus patients, that number is at 80%. Protective items worn by doctors and nurses, including masks, are also in desperately short supply at hospitals across the state. Such gear is critically important to protect the healthcare workers themselves from the coronavirus and to prevent them from further spreading it to other patients. Ochsner Chief Medical Officer Dr. Robert Hart said the health system is blowing through personal protective equipment like masks. Ochsner has directed staff to reuse the gear when possible to help stave off a looming shortage. In normal cases, we don't reuse these things in these settings, Hart said. Healthcare workers from a number of Louisiana hospitals told reporters they have been wearing the same masks for days on end and pulling on the same protective gowns repeatedly because of growing shortages. Louisiana is also looking for facilities where hospitals can send patients who have the coronavirus but no longer need hospitalization. The Edwards administration cast a wide net in its search for so-called step-down facilities that could free up hospital beds by housing patients who don't need intensive treatment. Edwards said his administration has ruled out converting now empty college dorms into makeshift hospitals, but said hotels across the state and the Ernest N. Memorial Convention Center in New Orleans are both still under consideration. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell said Wednesday that the convention center could house as many as 3,000 patients. Officials said they could spend millions outfitting facilities with beds. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is helping evaluate potential facilities, advising the state on converting them, a spokesperson said. If the epidemic threatens to overwhelm the hospitals in more rural parts of the state, he added, the Corps of Engineers could build a new medical facilities to treat the influx of patients. The governor has cut a larger national profile in recent days, appearing multiple times on national news programs to highlight Louisiana's spiraling situation and pointing to a University of Louisiana at Lafayette study that suggests the state could have the fastest growing rate for coronavirus cases in the world. Louisiana health officials and the governor, however, have cautioned that the recent ramp up in testing in Louisiana after very limited testing early on in the epidemic means the state is still figuring out the full scope of the crisis. All right. So I believe that is about the end of the story, of my stories that I have here. Hopefully this has been a worthwhile community service for you by AOC Community Media in partnership with, of course, the Daily Advocate, and thanks to all of our volunteer readers who normally are reading the news. If you want to be a volunteer reader, when we all get out of this, then you can contact us at info@aocinc.org. You can also check out that website if you want to listen to Cypress Street Radio. If you happen to be watching this on the TV, you can listen to radio, aocinc.org/CS radio, or just search for Cypress Street Radio. And you can stay tuned on our website. We'll have some more tips for communicating and keeping in touch while keeping distant, while honoring that social distancing, so we can hopefully flatten that curve and make that news that we all are hearing every morning a little bit less, bad news, a little bit more good news for our community and our area. And we're hoping everybody out there is doing all right and making it through. And I will, I think, play some more music. I'll just go ahead and give a little plug to Dig CC Mixter, which is our music playlist curator this morning. And let's see, it looks like we will kick off again with Into the J by Admiral Bob. So I'm going to bring that music up right now. And thanks everybody for listening.